Rose Blackwood snatched the letter from Amelia's hand before she'd even cleared the threshold. "You think a piece of paper makes you family?" Rose's voice didn't shake. That was the worst part. It was perfectly steady, perfectly cold, the voice of a 17-year-old who had learned to turn her grief into something with edges. She held the letter up, and for one terrible second, Amelia thought the girl was going to tear it in half right there in front of everyone. "My mother built this house. She planted every fence post on this ranch, and you rode in on a train with a suitcase and a smile thinking you could just walk into her life?" She dropped the letter on the floor instead, let it fall like it was nothing, like Amelia was nothing. That was Amelia Whitmore's first hour in Wyoming. If you've ever packed everything you owned into a single trunk and walked toward a life you could only imagine, then you already know the particular loneliness of that train ride west. Subscribe to this channel and follow this story to the end, because what happens inside the Blackwood Ranch over the next brutal Wyoming winter will stay with you long after the last word. Hit that like button and drop your city or country in the comments. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. The train had been delayed twice by drifting snow, which meant Amelia had spent 14 hours sitting in a rattling passenger car with nothing but a window full of white nothing and her own thoughts for company. She'd read Ethan Blackwood's letters so many times by then that she'd memorized the creases. She could have told you which words he'd pressed harder with the pen, where the ink had run slightly wet like he'd been writing fast, where he'd crossed something out and written over it. She'd studied those letters the way a person studies a map of a country they're about to enter without a guide. He had not been romantic. She'd appreciated that, actually. Some of the other women at the social in Harrisburg had read aloud from their prospective husbands' letters, breathless promises, flowery descriptions of sunsets and devotion, and every one of those letters had felt like it was written by a man who'd never done an honest day's work in his life and was performing some idea of what a woman wanted to hear. Ethan Blackwood's first letter had said, "I am a rancher with 5 children and considerable acreage outside Mill Haven, Wyoming. My wife Margaret died 14 months ago. I am not looking for someone to replace her. I am looking for a capable woman who understands that frontier life is not gentle and who is willing to work alongside me to keep this family together. If that is something you can offer honestly, I would like to correspond further," she'd written back the same afternoon. Something about his bluntness had felt more trustworthy than all the poetry in the world. That was 6 months ago. They'd exchanged 11 letters total. She knew he was 34, that he'd built the Blackwood Ranch himself from a quarter section of nothing, that he had a foreman named Gil Draper who'd worked with him for 9 years, that his eldest daughter was named Rose, and his youngest was a boy of 4 named Noah, and that Noah had recently started calling the barn cat by the name of President, which Ethan had mentioned almost as an aside, and which had made Amelia laugh out loud alone in her small Missouri kitchen and feel, for the first time in a long while, that she might actually want to know this man. She'd told him that in her 5th letter. He'd written back, "Noah insists President has expressed an interest in running for a 2nd term, but I've told him the cat lacks the necessary foreign policy experience." She'd read that line probably 30 times, so she knew things about Ethan Blackwood. She knew his mind, or the shape of it that he'd allowed her to see. What she did not know, what no letter could have possibly prepared her for, was the moment she stepped off the train at Mill Haven Station into a cold so absolute it felt like the air itself had been wrung out and frozen solid, and she looked up to find not Ethan, but a wagon driven by a man with a thick gray beard and a look on his face that suggested he'd drawn the short straw. "Gil Draper," he said, climbing down with the slow deliberateness of someone whose knees had opinions. He did not offer his hand. He looked at her trunk, then at her, then at the trunk again. "Mr. Blackwood sent me. He got held up with the east fence. Water trough froze, and one of the Herefords got tangled up in the wire trying to get at the hay. He said to tell you he's sorry." A pause. "He said it twice, actually, so he means it." "That's all right," Amelia said. "I didn't expect a brass band." Gil looked at her for the first time with something other than assessment. Not warmth exactly. More like the beginning of a question he hadn't finished forming yet. "You eaten?" "Not since Cheyenne." He nodded and went to get her trunk. The ride to the ranch took close to 2 hours. Gil wasn't a talker, but somewhere around the halfway point he said without looking at her, "The children know you're coming, The little ones are probably fine. Rose is going to be a problem. He said it the way you'd warn someone about a loose step on the porch. Just information. Proceed with awareness. How old is Rose? 17? Looks like her mother did at that age. Acts like her mother did too, which Margaret would have found either flattering or alarming depending on the day. He was quiet for a moment. She's been running that house since Margaret passed, cooking, managing the younger ones, keeping the accounts organized. She's good at it. Better than she should have to be. Amelia thought about that. She thinks I'm coming to take it away from her. Among other things, Gil said. She didn't ask what the other things were. She had a feeling she'd find out. The ranch came into view just as the light was going, a sprawl of dark buildings against white ground, lamplight in the windows, smoke rising straight up from two chimneys in the still cold air. It was larger than she'd imagined, more solid. The main house was 2 stories of thick-hewn timber, and the barn beyond it was enormous, the kind of structure that took real money and real labor to build. She could see the shape of the land even under all that snow, the way it rolled and folded, the tree line to the north that would break the worst of the wind. Margaret Blackwood had lived here for what, 15 years? Amelia tried to imagine it, building something that solid from open ground, the sheer stubbornness of it. Gil pulled the wagon up to the front of the house and had barely set the brake before the door opened and 2 small figures came running out. A girl of about 8 and the boy of 4 who had to be Noah, because he was wearing what appeared to be a blanket pinned around his shoulders like a cape and absolutely nothing on his head in 20-degree weather. Behind them came a girl of about 12 or 13, more cautious, stopping at the edge of the porch. "You have to come inside right now," the 12-year-old called out. "Papa said no running into the cold without coats, and you both have coats right there on the hook. And Noah, if you lose another hat, I will personally—" "Clara," Gil said, not loudly. She stopped. The boy, Noah, had reached Amelia by then and was looking up at her with the kind of absolute unfiltered interest that only very young children and very old dogs manage. He had hay in his hair and something that might have been jam on his chin, and his eyes were a startling gray, clear as creek water. "Are you the lady from the letters?" he asked. "I am," Amelia said. "Amelia Whitmore." "Papa reads your letters twice," Noah said. "Sometimes 3 times. I counted." "Noah," Clara said from the porch, in a voice that suggested this was not the first time she'd tried to stop him from saying something. "It's all right," Amelia said. She crouched down to his level, which put the cold ground very close and her knees immediately protesting, but it felt important. "And you must be Noah. I heard you have a cat named President." His entire face changed. It was like watching a lamp get lit. "He's in the barn. He doesn't like the house because Rose said he was tracking in mud, but I think he just prefers the barn because of the mice. And also the barn is warmer if you go to the right corner near where Biscuit sleeps. Biscuit is the horse I'm not allowed to ride yet, but Papa says maybe in spring." "Noah!" This voice was different, older, and it came from the doorway where Amelia hadn't noticed anyone standing until just now. Rose Blackwood was tall for 17, which was the first thing Amelia registered. The second was that she was holding a dish towel and had flour on her forearm, and the look on her face was the specific expression of someone who has spent a long time deciding what they are going to feel about something and has finally arrived at their answer, and that answer is not warm. She looked at Amelia the way you look at something you've been told you have to accept and have decided you will not. "Come inside," she said. "Supper's going cold." It was not an invitation. It was barely even a sentence. It was a door held open just wide enough for you to understand you were being permitted entry, not welcomed. That was when Amelia straightened up, picked up her smaller bag because Gil was already handling the trunk, and walked toward the house. She had come a very long way. She was not going to stand in the cold and have feelings about it. The inside of the house was, she hadn't expected it to feel so lived in, so particular. There were drawings pinned to the wall near the kitchen, children's drawings, and a row of mismatched boots by the door arranged from largest to smallest, and something on the stove that smelled like beef and onion and black pepper. There was a braided rug in front of the fireplace that was worn soft in the center from years of feet. A rocking chair near the window with a sewing basket beside it that Amelia was quite certain had not been moved in some time. Not really moved, maybe tidied around but not touched, the way you leave things that belong to someone who is gone because moving them feels too final. She was aware she was seeing Margaret Blackwood's house. The 8-year-old tugged her sleeve. "I'm Lily. I'm 8. I lost a tooth last week and Papa gave me a penny for it. And I bought a piece of licorice at the store in town, except Gil says licorice isn't worth a penny. It's worth maybe half a penny. But Gil is wrong because licorice is delicious." "Gil does seem like the kind of man who might undervalue licorice," Amelia agreed. Lily giggled, startled by it, and then seemed to remember something and went slightly more serious, the way children do when they're copying an emotion they've seen adults perform. "Rose said we have to be polite, but we don't have to be, I forget the word she used." "Sycophantic?" Clara offered from across the room, settling herself at the table with the resigned air of someone who has had this conversation already. "That one," Lily said. "I wouldn't ask you to be anything you don't feel," Amelia said. "Polite is fine, as that's a good start for people who just met." She looked up and found Rose watching her from the kitchen doorway. Something shifted in the girl's expression, so quick Amelia almost missed it, before it closed back down again into that careful flatness. The boy Amelia hadn't placed yet appeared from the hallway, 13, maybe 14, with the particular gangly self-consciousness of a boy who'd recently grown several inches without planning to. He looked at Amelia and then immediately at the floor. "I'm Thomas," he said. "I already ate. I was helping with the horses." "Thomas is the best rider on the ranch," Lily said loyally. "I'm the only rider my age on the ranch," Thomas said to the floor. "That counts." They were sitting down to supper, a kind of organized chaos of serving spoons and elbows, and Noah insisting he needed more bread even though his bread was right there, when the door opened and Ethan Blackwood came in. She'd seen him in her mind, in the way you build a person from their words. The picture she'd built was close but wrong in the way portraits are always slightly wrong. Technically accurate, but missing something. He was taller than she'd imagined, and broader through the shoulders, and there was a tiredness in him that was not the tiredness of a man who'd had a long day, but the tiredness of a man who'd been having long days for a very long time, and had stopped expecting them to get shorter. He had a cut on his left hand, recent, probably from the wire he'd mentioned through Gil, and he hadn't taken his coat off yet, and he looked at her from across the room with an expression that was trying very hard to be readable and not quite managing it. "Miss Whitmore?" he said. "Mr. Blackwood." A pause that had several things in it. "I'm sorry about the station. The fence situation," Gil explained, "a heifer and a frozen trough. I understand." She held his gaze steadily because she'd decided on the train that she was not going to perform anxiousness for anyone in this house. "Your children let me in." Something crossed his face at that. Relief, maybe. Or the beginning of it. "Good." He looked at the table, at Noah, who was now trying to feed himself with his eyes closed for reasons nobody had asked, at Lily, who was rearranging her peas into what appeared to be a territorial map of some kind, at Thomas, who was attempting to look like he was somewhere else. He looked at Clara, who looked back at him with the serious eyes of a girl who had been paying attention to everything. Then he looked at Rose, who was setting a bread plate on the table with careful, controlled precision and not looking at anyone. "Rose made supper," he said. "It smells good." "It's the same thing I make every Monday," Rose said. "Sit down. The biscuits are getting cold." They ate. It was not comfortable exactly, but it was real. Noah talked almost continuously about President the Cat's recent activities, which apparently included an unauthorized exploration of the feed room and a confrontation with a mouse that had ended ambiguously. Lily asked Amelia 17 questions in a row about Missouri, whether it was true the rivers there were warmer, whether Amelia had ever seen a riverboat, whether riverboats had beds on them, or did you sleep standing up? Thomas ate quickly and silently and refilled his water glass twice and passed the biscuits when asked. Clara watched everything and ate neatly and offered occasional corrections to Noah's account of President's activities, which Noah disputed with great energy. Ethan spoke when spoken to and looked at Amelia twice, once when she answered one of Lily's questions about the Missouri River and made Lily laugh. And once when she asked Thomas a question about the horses, without making it seem like she was trying to engage him, just a genuine question, and Thomas answered it in full sentences. Rose did not look at her at all. After supper, after the children had been directed toward baths and bed, in the general organized negotiation that bedtime required, after Gil had come in for his coffee and his pipe, and departed again with a nod that might have been approval, after all of that, Ethan showed Amelia to the room that would be hers. It was small and clean, with a quilt on the bed that was old but not worn out, and a window that faced east so she'd get the morning light. It was Clara's room before she moved in with Lily, he said. He wasn't sure she could tell how much to say. I can get more wood for the stove if you need it. I'm fine, thank you. He nodded, made to leave, stopped with his hand on the doorframe. I know this isn't what you pictured, he said, not looking at her. What makes you think that? He did look then. I know Rose wasn't exactly... Rose is protecting her family, Amelia said. I'd think less of her if she wasn't. She paused. What did you picture, Mr. Blackwood, when you were writing those letters? He was quiet for long enough that she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, someone who could take this seriously, who wouldn't run at the first hard thing. His voice was careful around the edges. I got the impression from your letters that you were that kind of person. I am, she said. You won't see me run. He nodded once and left. She stood in the middle of the small room for a moment, listening to the sounds of the house settling. Water running somewhere, one of the children's voices, a door, the creak of the staircase under Ethan's weight. Outside the window, the wind had started up, moving the snow across the dark ground in long white sweeps. She'd left everything she knew to come here. She'd sold her furniture and ended her lease and said goodbye to the 3 people in Harrisburg who'd noticed she was gone. She'd sat on that train for 14 hours, and she'd read those letters until the paper was soft at the folds, and she'd told herself she was doing something brave. Standing in this room, in this house full of grief that hadn't finished yet, she understood that brave was not the right word. The right word was necessary. She needed this. Not the marriage, not the security. Something underneath all of that. A place to belong that she'd actually earned. She sat down on the edge of the quilt and pressed her palms flat against her knees and thought about Rose dropping that letter on the floor. The sound of it, paper hitting wood. She thought, that girl is going to be the hardest thing in this house. Not the weather, not the work, not the grief that lives in Ethan Blackwood's eyes. Rose. She thought, I'm not going to fight her. Fighting her would be exactly wrong. She took her hat off and hung it on the peg by the door and began to unpack. She'd been doing it for maybe 10 minutes when she heard it. A sound outside her door, barely a sound at all. The distinct non-sound of someone who had stopped moving in the hallway and was deciding whether to keep going. Amelia didn't call out. She kept folding her second blouse, kept moving in the same unhurried rhythm, and after a moment the almost sound in the hallway started moving again, away down the corridor, and then there was just the wind. She thought, she came to listen. She wanted to know who was in this room, and then she thought, that's something, that's not nothing. She set her blouse in the drawer and started on the next one. The first night in the Blackwood house, Amelia slept badly and woke before the household and lay in the dark listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the building. The particular creak of the boards, the particular way the wind came against these walls, and she thought about what Gil had said in the wagon. She's been running that house since Margaret passed. She's good at it, better than she should have to be. That was a girl who had lost her mother and then, without being asked, had become what the family needed, had cooked and organized and held things together at 17 because nobody else was going to. And now here was this woman from Missouri who had answered a newspaper notice, and everything Rose had built herself into over 14 months was potentially nothing. Amelia lay there in the gray pre-dawn and thought, I would have been exactly as cold to me. She got up before anyone else was moving, found the kitchen by memory, and started the stove. She wasn't trying to take over the kitchen, she was just functional in the morning, always had been. She found the coffee and the grinder and a clean pot, and she was standing at the stove when she heard the step on the stair and turned to find Rose in the doorway, in her dressing gown, hair loose, looking like she'd materialized specifically to be annoyed. The girl stared at the stove, looked at Amelia, looked at the stove again. I always do the morning coffee, she said. I know, Amelia said. I should have asked. I'm sorry. She meant it. She stepped back from the stove all the way back, put the pot down. It's your kitchen. A pause. Rose came forward and took the handle of the pot without looking at her and finished what Amelia had started, and neither of them said anything for a while. The stove ticked as it warmed. Outside, something, a horse probably, moved in the barn. How do you take it? Rose asked finally. Her voice said she regretted asking. Black, Amelia said. Thank you. Rose put 2 cups on the table and they sat across from each other in the early morning quiet and drank coffee that Amelia had started and Rose had finished, and nothing resolved itself, but something at least had been stated. I am here. I am not leaving. I am also not here to take anything from you. Rose drank her coffee fast and stood up and said, Breakfast is at 7. The little ones need their oatmeal before school. I'll help if you want, Amelia said. If not, I'll stay out of your way. A long pause. Something working itself out in the girl's face. You can do the oatmeal, Rose said. I hate making oatmeal. It was the first thing Rose had given her. Amelia understood the size of it. All right, she said. Consider it mine. That was the second morning in the Blackwood house. Ethan appeared at 6:45, already dressed for work, moving through the kitchen with the efficiency of a man who had learned not to take up space in his own house since his wife died. And he looked at the two of them, Rose at the counter, rolling biscuit dough, Amelia at the stove stirring the pot, with an expression that was too carefully neutral to be accidental. Morning, he said. Sit down, Rose said. Biscuits in 10 minutes. He sat. He looked at Amelia and looked away, poured his own coffee. Thomas came down the stairs 2 at a time and stopped dead in the kitchen doorway and looked at the same configuration, Rose and Amelia and the stove, and then at his father, and then he sat down without saying anything and ate his breakfast with the focus of a person filing information away for later. Clara came in already dressed with her hair in 2 careful braids and sat down and said good morning to Amelia with the gravity of a small diplomat recognizing a head of state. Noah came in wearing his cape blanket and 1 boot. Noah, 3 people said simultaneously. I know, he said, and went back for the other boot. Later, after the children had gone toward their lessons, after Ethan had headed back out to the ranch work, after the breakfast dishes were done in a cooperative silence that wasn't comfortable but wasn't hostile, Rose handed Amelia a broom and said, The back hallway. The snow tracks in from the boot room and it doesn't sweep itself. Amelia took the broom. She swept the back hallway. She was most of the way through it when she noticed the door at the end of the hall was slightly ajar, and beyond it, a small room. A sewing room by the look of it. Or it had been. A basket, a small table, curtains that were closed. She could just see the edge of something on the table, a stack of papers, letters maybe, tied with a ribbon that had once been blue. She didn't go in. She pulled the hallway door closed quietly and went on sweeping. But she thought about those papers for the rest of the morning, and she thought about Rose, and about Margaret, and about what kind of woman builds a house this solid in country, this hard, and what she might have known, writing letters that nobody was supposed to read yet. The broom stayed in the back hallway closet after that first morning, and Amelia used it every day without being asked twice. That was how she learned the house, not by being shown it, but by cleaning it. The back hallway that tracked snow in from the boot room, the corner of the parlor where the floorboard lifted just enough to catch a toe if you weren't paying attention. The window in Thomas's room that let cold air in through a gap in the frame that somebody had stuffed with a rag 2 winters ago and never properly fixed. She learned the house the way you learn a person. The small things first. The things they didn't know they were showing you, Rose noticed. She didn't say anything about it, but she noticed, and Amelia could tell because the girl had stopped tracking her movements with quite the same vigilance. Not trust. Not even close to trust. More like, Rose had established that Amelia was not going to break anything, and had temporarily filed that information away and moved on to watching for the next problem. The next problem arrived in the form of Thomas, who on the 4th morning failed to appear for breakfast and who was discovered by Amelia on her way out to the woodpile for the stove, sitting on an upturned bucket behind the barn in 25-degree cold with no hat and a split lip. She stopped. He looked up at her with the expression of a boy who has made peace with being found, but would have preferred not to be. "The other boy looks worse," he said preemptively. "Which other boy?" "Danny Pruitt. He said something about—" Thomas looked at the frozen ground. "About you. About us having about the advertisement. In the paper." His jaw was set hard. "I didn't start it." Amelia sat down on the second upturned bucket that was just there, which suggested this was a regular sitting spot and not an accident. "What did he say?" "That we needed a mail-order wife because our mother died and our father couldn't." He stopped, pressed his sleeve against his lip. "It doesn't matter what he said." "It clearly matters." "I handled it." "You're sitting behind a barn in the cold with a split lip." "I said I handled it." His voice cracked slightly on the last word, and he looked furious at himself for it. He was 13, she reminded herself. He had lost his mother at 12 and had spent 14 months pretending to be more solid than he was. I'm not a child." I know you're not," she said. She didn't reach for him, didn't push anything. "For what it's worth, the advertisement was my choice, not your father's. He wrote me a letter. I answered it. The difference matters." Thomas looked at her sideways. "Why? Why'd you answer it?" It was a real question. She gave him a real answer. "Because I was alone in a small town, and I'd been alone for a long time, and I thought, a family that needs someone, and a person who needs a family, that's not a bad equation if everyone is honest about it." He turned that over. "You were lonely?" "Yes." He seemed to find something in that, some permission she hadn't intended but that he'd taken anyway. "I miss her," he said. Not loudly, just a fact, set down. "I know everyone does, but I keep thinking she would have known what to do about Danny Pruitt. She always knew what to do about that kind of thing. She would have said something that made it smaller." Amelia thought about Margaret Blackwood's rocking chair with the sewing basket beside it, the one nobody moved. What kind of things did she usually say? Thomas almost smiled. It was lopsided because of the lip. "She used to say that mean people are mostly just scared people making noise. She said the noise was the giveaway." He paused. "She had a lot of sayings. Rose has them all memorized. She says them sometimes and doesn't realize she's doing it." Amelia filed that away carefully. "Come inside," she said. "I'll get something cold for your lip before Rose sees it and makes it into a whole thing." He followed her in. She didn't make it into a whole thing. She handed him a cloth with snow wrapped in it and didn't ask any more questions, and he ate his cold oatmeal standing up at the counter, which she allowed without comment. And when he left for his chores, he said, almost too quietly to hear, "Thanks." She didn't make anything of that either. What she was learning about this household was that everything meant twice what it appeared to mean, and that the way to lose the children's trust permanently was to make too much of the small things they offered. They were watching her the way wary animals watch something new in their territory. Not running, but tracking every motion, every reaction, filing it all somewhere behind those careful eyes. The moment she pressed, the moment she treated any small opening as a victory and tried to push through it, they would close. She could feel that as clearly as she could feel the cold coming off the walls. So she didn't press. She cooked the oatmeal every morning and kept out of Rose's way in the kitchen and swept the hallway and fixed the rag in Thomas's window with proper caulk she'd found in the barn workshop. And when Lily asked her 40 questions at supper, she answered every one without turning them into lessons. Ethan watched all of this. She knew he was watching, but he did it sideways, the way he did most things. Not direct, not obvious, but present. He'd come in from the ranch work in the evenings and sit at the end of the table, and the children would report the day at him in overlapping layers, and he'd listen to all of it and respond to each one, and then he'd look at Amelia once, just once, quick and measuring, and then he'd look at his plate. He was not a man who said things easily. She'd known that from the letters, but the letters had felt more open than this somehow, more willing. She understood why. Writing was safer. Writing gave you time to decide what to show. On the 6th evening, she caught him at the desk in the small room off the main hall that served as his office, going over ledgers with the focused unhappiness of a man dealing with numbers that were not adding up the way he needed them to. She'd brought him coffee without asking because it was 9 at night and he'd skipped his after-supper cup, and she'd noticed. He looked at the coffee, then at her. You don't have to. I know I don't, she said. She looked at the ledger, not intrusively, just acknowledging that it existed. The East grazing lease? He blinked. How do you know about the East grazing lease? Gil mentioned the East fence twice this week. When men mention a fence twice in 1 week, it's usually because there's a money question attached to it. She hadn't meant to say that much, but she'd grown up watching her father run a farm into the ground by not talking about the money questions until they were catastrophic. Sorry, that's not my business. No, it's... He stopped, rubbed the back of his neck. The lease comes up for renewal in March. The rate they're asking it's high. Higher than last year, and last year was already a stretch. He looked at the ledger like it had done something to him personally. I've been trying to find where to pull from without cutting the household accounts. She sat down, not at his desk, but in the chair near the window. What does the East acreage give you that the rest of the land doesn't? He looked at her for a moment as if he was deciding something. Then he pulled the ledger around and talked her through it. The grazing rotation, the water access, the way the East section fed into the spring calving operation, and what it would cost to reorganize the herd without it. He talked for 20 minutes, and she listened and asked 2 questions, and he answered them, and at the end of it he sat back and said, You understood all of that. My father had a farm. I grew up reading the books. He teach you, or did you just... Taught myself mostly. He wasn't much for teaching. She paused. What he was for was making decisions without enough information, and then being very confident about them. I learned the numbers because somebody had to know them. Something shifted in Ethan's face. Recognition, maybe, of a specific kind of childhood. Margaret kept the books here, he said. She was better at it than I am. A pause. She was better at most things than I advertised. I got that impression, Amelia said carefully, from the house. He looked at her. What do you mean? The way it's built, the way it's organized. Everything has a logic to it that goes beyond practical. The way the kitchen is laid out, the way the storage is arranged, the little room with the sewing things. Somebody thought about how a family moves through a house and made it easier. She paused. A person who does that thinks about other people constantly, habitually. It's not a skill you can teach. You either see it or you don't. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. She would have liked you, he said finally. It came out like he hadn't planned to say it, and she could tell from the way his face went that he wasn't sure he'd meant to. She didn't try to answer that. Some things didn't need an answer, and adding words to them was only dilution. She stood up and said goodnight and left him with his ledger and his coffee, and whatever he was going to do with what he'd just said. She was almost to the stairs when she realized the light was still on in the sewing room. She stopped. The door was open 2 inches, the same 2 inches as before, and through it she could see the small table and the stack of papers and the faded blue ribbon. And she could hear, very quietly, the near-silent sound of someone crying without wanting to be heard. Rose. Amelia stood in the hallway and did not move. She did not go to the door. She did not call out. She stood for 2 full minutes and listened to Ethan's eldest daughter cry in her dead mother's sewing room, and then she walked past, quietly, and went upstairs to bed. Some things you don't intrude on. Some grief is not yours to touch. She lay awake for an hour thinking about Margaret Blackwood's letters. The next morning she asked Rose during the oatmeal, the little room off the back hall, what was it used for? Rose went still for just a moment at the counter. Mama's sewing room. I noticed her things are still in there. Yes. Rose's voice had gone carefully flat. I won't go in, Amelia said. That room isn't mine to go in. Rose turned around and looked at her. A long look. The kind that's actually searching for something, not just performing hostility. Papa said you could use whatever rooms you needed. I know what he said. I'm telling you what I decided. Amelia stirred the oatmeal. There's a difference. Something happened in Rose's face that Rose immediately controlled, but not before Amelia saw it. She didn't make anything of it. She was starting to understand that not making things of things was the most powerful move she had in this house. It was Clara who came to her 4 days later, quietly, deliberately, the way Clara did everything. She appeared in the doorway of Amelia's room on a Tuesday afternoon with a book pressed flat against her chest like a shield, and said, "I'm having trouble with the long division. Rose usually helps me, but Rose is busy." Amelia put down the mending she'd been working through, a pile of the children's things that had accumulated in the basket by the door, small rips and missing buttons, and said, "Bring it over here." Clara sat beside her on the narrow bench and opened the arithmetic book, and they worked through long division for 45 minutes. And Clara was sharp, sharper than the material was giving her credit for, and at one point she caught a mistake in Amelia's working out and pointed it out without hesitating. "You're right," Amelia said. "I rushed the second step." Clara looked at her. "You made a mistake." "I do that. Not often in arithmetic, but sometimes." She took the pencil back and corrected it. "How did you spot it?" "I always check the answer first and work backward," Clara said. "Rose taught me that. She says you should always know where you're going before you figure out how to get there." Amelia looked at her. "That's good advice for more than arithmetic." Clara seemed to consider whether this was condescending, decided it wasn't. "Rose is smart," she said. "She just pretends she isn't sometimes, so people don't expect too much." Another pause. "She said you seem capable." Amelia kept her expression level. "When did she say that?" "This morning, to Thomas. She thought I wasn't listening." Clara's face was perfectly composed. "I'm always listening." "I'll remember that." Clara took her arithmetic book back. "She also said you were probably here for the security, the ranch, and the name and the stability. She said most people make choices because of what they need, not because of what they feel." "She's not wrong about that generally," Amelia said. "Are you? Here for the security?" A 12-year-old asking the real question that none of the adults had managed to ask directly. Amelia thought about it properly before she answered. "I needed somewhere to belong. That's a kind of security, I suppose. But what I found when I got here is, I like your family. I like how you all work. I like that your father thinks hard before he speaks, and that Thomas would take a split lip before he'd let someone speak badly about his family, and that Lily knows the exact monetary value of licorice, and that Noah has strong opinions about presidential qualifications." She paused. "I like that Rose runs this house like she's holding it together by force of will, because she is, and she knows it, and she does it anyway." Clara looked at her steadily. "You've been watching us. Haven't you been watching me?" A beat, then something close to a smile. "Yes," Clara admitted. "Good," Amelia said. "You should. You're all too smart not to." Clara left without another word, taking her arithmetic book and her composed small diplomat expression back down the hallway. And Amelia picked up the mending again and thought about what it meant that Rose had called her capable. It wasn't warmth. It wasn't forgiveness for existing in this house, for wearing a version of the role that had belonged to Margaret. But capable was something. Capable was a beginning. The letters found her 3 days later. She wasn't looking for them. She'd gone into the storeroom behind the kitchen to inventory the winter stock. This was a practical decision that Ethan had mentioned needing done, and that Rose had been putting off because the storeroom was cold and the inventory was tedious. And she was on her knees in front of the lower shelves counting tins when she reached past a large jar of preserved peaches, and her fingers found something that wasn't a jar. A wooden box. Small, the kind used for keepsakes. Not hidden exactly, but set back far enough that you'd have to reach for it. She pulled it out and looked at it and knew immediately that she should put it back. Whatever was in this box was none of her business. She started to do it. Started to slide it back behind the peaches. And the latch slipped under her thumb, and the box opened, and she saw the handwriting. "To the woman who comes after me. If you have found this, then things have gone a way I hoped they wouldn't, and I'm sorry for that, for you and for all of us." She closed the box, sat back on her heels, felt her own heartbeat in a specific unpleasant way. She brought it to Ethan that evening. She set it on his desk and stepped back and said, "I found it in the storeroom behind the preserved peaches. I read the first 2 lines before I understood what it was. I'm sorry." He looked at the box for a long moment. His face did something complicated. "I didn't know she'd done that," he said. "I didn't know. It may not be. It may be something private, something she meant just for you. It's addressed to the woman who comes after her. His voice was even, too even. That's you. Amelia didn't answer. He looked up. Read it, he said. You should read it. Ethan, please, he said, just that. She took the box and went to her room and sat on the edge of the quilt and opened it and read Margaret Blackwood's letters by lamplight with the wind against the east window and the sounds of the house settling around her. There were 7 letters. Not long. Margaret had been a practical woman by the evidence of everything she'd left behind, and the letters were practical too, but they had a warmth underneath the practicality that Amelia had to stop and breathe through several times. The first letter was an overview, as Margaret had called it, a map of the children. Thomas's pride and how easily it could become a wall if you pushed against it rather than worked beside it. Claire's intelligence and how she used composure as armor and what it meant when that armor slipped. Lily's need for laughter and how the household went gray without it. Noah's huge unfiltered heart and how you had to make sure he knew it was safe to keep it that way. And Rose. The letter about Rose was the longest. She will be the hardest, Margaret had written. I know this because I was the same at her age, and I know what it cost my own mother, and I've watched Rose build herself up since I got sick in a way that breaks my heart to see. She's so strong, and she doesn't know yet that being that strong alone will eventually tire her out completely. What she needs, and will not ask for, is someone who sees the strength and doesn't try to soften it. Don't try to make her gentler. She doesn't need to be gentler. She needs someone to stand beside the strength and say, I see this, and I'm not leaving because of it, and I'm not competing with it. When she finally trusts you, and she will, if you're patient enough and honest enough, she will be the most loyal person you have ever known. She loved me like a house on fire, that girl. Don't let her forget how. Amelia put the letter down, pressed both palms flat against the quilt, sat in the lamplight and the cold and the sound of the wind. She thought about Rose in the sewing room, crying without wanting to be heard. 17 years old with flour on her arms and her dead mother's sayings in her mouth and the weight of this entire household in her hands, and underneath all of it, a girl who had loved her mother like a house on fire and was still burning. She read the rest of the letters. There were instructions, practical ones. Which of the children hated beans and why Thomas wouldn't eat anything red since an incident with beets at age 5 that he would deny remembering. That Clara's calm broke in thunderstorms, not because of the noise, but because of the lightning, which she found beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. That Ethan would not ask for help with the hard things, and the only way to help him was to simply start helping without making it into a conversation about helping. He will tell you he's fine, Margaret had written. He is almost never fine. He is managing. There is a difference. He knows the difference. He just hopes you won't notice it. And at the end of the 7th letter, I'm sorry I'm not there. I'm sorry you have to build something in the ruins of what we had. What I hope, what I've built all of this for, the letters and the instructions and everything I've tried to leave behind, is that maybe it doesn't have to stay ruins. Maybe someone with the right kind of stubborn love can build something in the same ground, and it won't replace what we had. It'll just be new, different, its own thing. I think that's allowed. I hope that's allowed. Amelia set the 7th letter down and sat in the quiet for a long time. Then she folded them carefully, all 7, and put them back in the wooden box, and went downstairs to the sewing room. She knocked. She didn't open the door. She knocked and waited. Rose opened it. She was in her nightgown, her hair loose, and she'd clearly been in there for some time. There was a quilt around her shoulders and a cup of tea gone cold on the small table beside the papers with the blue ribbon. She looked at Amelia and then at the wooden box in Amelia's hands, and something in her face went very still. Where did you find that? She said. Behind the preserved peaches in the storeroom. I wasn't looking for it. Amelia held it out. Your father said I should read it. I did. And now I'm bringing it to you because it belongs to you more than it belongs to him, and certainly more than it belongs to me. Rose looked at the box. Her hands came up and took it, and she held it against her chest exactly the way Clara had held the arithmetic book, pressed flat, protective. What did she say? Rose asked. Her voice was doing the thing it did when she was holding it very carefully, keeping it level by effort rather than feeling. She said you loved her like a house on fire. Amelia kept her voice steady. She said you'd be the hardest. She said it like she was proud of it. Rose's face broke, just for a second, just a fraction, a crack in the plaster, before she got it back. Her jaw was tight, her eyes were bright. I'm not going to pretend to be her, Amelia said. I'm not going to try to be something in this house that I'm not. But I want you to know, I read every word she left, every letter, and I'm going to try to do right by what she built. A pause. That's not a promise. I'm not the kind of person who makes promises I can't guarantee. That's just what I intend. Rose looked at her for a long moment. Long enough that Amelia felt the cold in the hallway properly, felt the hour of the night, heard the wind moving outside. She was extraordinary, Rose said finally. You know that. You read it. I can see it in everything she left behind. You can't replace that. I'm not trying to, Amelia said. Another long silence. Rose looked at the box, ran her thumb along the edge of the latch. She made peach preserves every August, she said, every single year, enough to last all winter. She said fruit in February was the difference between surviving and living. A pause. We still have some. From the last summer, I keep not opening them. Amelia looked at her. You don't have to. I know. Rose's voice was very quiet. I know that. She stepped back and let the door close, and Amelia walked back down the hallway, and the wind moved the snow across the dark ground outside, and the house held them all inside it, the grief and the work, and the beginning of something that didn't have a name yet, but was there. The way a fire is there, even before it fully catches, present in the heat before the flame. The peach preserves stayed on the shelf through the rest of January. Nobody opened them, nobody moved them either. They sat behind the other jars in the storeroom like a held breath, and Amelia walked past them every day when she did the inventory, and she did not touch them, and she did not mention them, and she thought about what Rose had said. Fruit in February was the difference between surviving and living, and she thought Margaret had probably meant more than fruit when she said it. February came in hard. Wyoming winter had a quality that Missouri cold did not, and Amelia had thought she understood cold. She did not understand cold. This was something that got inside the walls of a house and sat there, that turned the water in the pipes to something sluggish and unwilling, that made the barn animals restless in a specific anxious way, like they knew something the humans were still calculating. Gil said this was a bad one coming, and Gil had the particular credibility of a man who had lived through 30 Wyoming winters and was still standing, so when he said bad, Amelia believed him. The children felt it too, the way children feel weather in their joints before it arrives. Lily stopped asking 40 questions at supper and started asking 20, which for Lily was a kind of quiet. Noah dragged his blanket cape everywhere and started sleeping with it, which Rose allowed without comment, which told Amelia something about how Rose's edges worked. They softened for the little ones in cold weather, almost automatically, like a door that opens easier in certain temperatures. Thomas had started, somewhere in the last 2 weeks, to appear near whatever Amelia was doing without exactly asking to be included. He'd find reasons to be in the kitchen while she was working through the afternoon tasks, or in the storeroom while she was doing inventory, and he wouldn't say much, but he'd hand her things before she reached for them, which meant he'd been paying enough attention to know what she'd reach for next. She didn't remark on it. He was 13 and proud, and whatever this was, this cautious gravitational thing, would collapse if she named it. Ethan had started leaving the office door open in the evenings. She noticed. She didn't say anything about that either, but she started timing her pass through the hall with a second cup of coffee, and sometimes she stopped, and sometimes she didn't. And when she did stop, they talked about the ranch or the children, or twice, about things that had nothing to do with either. A book she'd mentioned in one of her letters that he'd apparently found in the Millhaven Lending Library and read, and the way the East Ridge looked in the late afternoon light when the snow caught it at the right angle, which he described with more precision than she'd expected from a man who communicated primarily in ledgers and understatement. She was learning him the way she'd learned the house, from the edges in. It was on a Thursday, the first week of February, that Rose came to her room, not knocking, standing in the open doorway with the wooden box in her hands, the one with Margaret's letters, which she'd had in her room since Amelia brought it to her. She looked like she'd been arguing with herself about whether to come, and had resolved the argument only recently and without complete confidence. I read them again, she said. The letters. All right, Amelia said. She set down the shirt she was mending, didn't stand, didn't make a production of the moment. She wrote about you. I mean, not you specifically, but she wrote about whoever would come. Rose came 2 steps into the room and stopped. She said she hoped it would be someone patient. She said patience was the hardest thing to find. A pause. She also said the children would test it thoroughly. They have, Amelia said. Something almost like a smile. Rose looked down at the box. She wrote about me. I know. What she said. About loving her like a house on fire. Rose's voice went careful around the words. I've been thinking about that. About whether she meant it as a good thing. Amelia looked at her steadily. She meant it as the truest thing she knew about you. Rose sat down in the chair near the window without being invited, which was, Amelia understood, a significant thing. She set the box on her knees and put both hands flat on top of it. I've been terrible to you. You've been protective of your family. There's a difference. I dropped your letter on the floor. Yes, you did. I told Clara you were probably here for the security. You told her most people make decisions based on what they need. That's true. Amelia paused. You weren't wrong about me. I did need something. I just found out it was different from what I thought I needed. Rose looked at her. What did you think you needed? Stability. A clear purpose. Something solid to build a life on. Amelia looked at the window, at the gray light coming through it. What I actually needed was people worth working for. That's different. Rose was quiet for a moment. She would have liked you, she said. Mama. Her voice did the thing, the careful thing, the controlled thing, but she held it together. She liked people who said what they actually meant. She had no patience for performance. She looked at the box. I perform a lot. I know I do. I learned it from watching her, but I got the wrong lesson somehow. She performed for other people. I perform for myself, I think. To convince myself I'm holding things together. You're holding things together, Amelia said. It's exhausting. I know. I don't want to stop, Rose said immediately, like she was defending herself against a suggestion Amelia hadn't made. I don't want to step back or let go or whatever it is you're supposed to do when someone comes in to... I can't just... Rose, Amelia kept her voice very level. I don't want you to stop. I want you to have help. That's not the same thing. The girl looked at her, really looked, for probably the first time since Amelia had stepped off the train, not cataloging threat or assessing competition, but just looking. The way you look at something you're finally willing to see. Okay, she said quietly. Just that. Okay. It was not a resolution. It was not the end of anything difficult between them, but it was a door held open a different way than before, wider, and from the inside. 3 days later, the storm came. Gil had said bad. Bad turned out to be the kind of word that became inadequate around midnight on the 10th of February, when the wind shifted north and the temperature dropped 15 degrees in 2 hours, and the snow that had been falling reasonably became something else entirely. Not falling, moving, driving, horizontal and furious and white, in a way that turned the yard into a wall of nothing at arm's length. Amelia woke to the sound of it against her east window, not the usual sound of wind and snow, but a sustained violence that sat in the chest differently, and she lay in the dark for exactly 30 seconds before she got up. The hallway was cold, in a way that meant the temperature had dropped fast and hard. She could hear the house, the creak and shudder of timber under the assault outside, the rattle of the kitchen window she'd been meaning to ask Gil to refit, the low, constant roar that had replaced the usual nighttime quiet. She was pulling on her second layer when she heard Ethan's boots on the stairs, not the normal measured tread, but faster, purposeful. And she stepped into the hallway, and he was already at the end of it, coat half on, and his face when he turned had a quality she hadn't seen in it before. Not the managed tiredness. Something sharper. Noah's not in his room, he said. The words hit her differently than she expected. Not slowly, instantly, the whole picture of it. The storm, the dark, The boy of 4 who was small enough that the drifts forming against the outbuildings would already be above his head. When did you last— I checked on them all at 10. He was asleep. Ethan was already moving toward the stairs. Rose is checking the downstairs. Gil's quarters— I'll check the barn, Amelia said. He stopped and looked at her. It's not— He talks about the barn cat constantly, she said. President, if he woke up scared and he goes to what makes him feel safe. He's 4. She was already moving toward the boot room. Get your coat on properly. I'll take the near path. She didn't wait for him to agree or disagree. The cold outside the door was not cold. It was an event. It was something that happened to you the way a collision happens to you, full and immediate and total. And she had 3 seconds of pure shock before her body adjusted to the fact that this was the reality now, and forward was the only option. The wind was coming from the northwest, and the path to the barn was 20 yards. And she could see the barn lamp. Gil left a lamp on in the barn all winter, as a dim yellowish smear through the white, and she walked toward it with her head down and her coat collar up, and her eyes half closed against the driving snow. The barn door was latched from outside. That registered. She lifted the latch and pulled the door, and it fought her, the wind against it, and she got it open enough to get through and pulled it closed behind her. The barn was 10 degrees warmer than outside and relatively still, and in the first second of adjusting, she heard it. Not a cat, not an animal. A human sound, small and tired and frightened. Noah was in the corner near Biscuit's stall, exactly where he told her the barn was warmest, curled up in the hay with President the cat pressed against his side, and his cape blanket wrapped around both of them. And his face, when he looked up at her, was the specific face of a child who has been crying and has cried himself out and is now just cold and waiting. I got scared, he said. His voice was hoarse. The wind was very loud. She crossed the barn in about 4 steps and crouched down and pulled him against her and felt how cold he was, hands and ears and the back of his neck. And she held him tight and pulled her coat around him as much as she could and said into his hair, I know. I've got you. President was scared too, Noah said. President, for his part, regarded Amelia with the composed disdain of a cat who had the situation well in hand and had not required assistance. President seems like he was managing, Amelia said. He was scared on the inside, Noah said, with great authority. The barn door crashed open and Ethan came through it in a blast of cold and snow, and his eyes went straight to Amelia and Noah, and something in his face, the sharp thing, the fear, went out of it all at once, like a lamp turned down. He crossed to them and went to his knees in the hay beside her without any hesitation and put both hands on Noah's face and looked at him with the focused intensity of a father doing a rapid internal accounting of whether his child was whole. Hey, bud, he said. His voice was steady. His hands were shaking slightly. Hey. I came to see if President was okay, Noah explained. In the middle of a blizzard. I didn't know it was a blizzard yet. Ethan looked at him for another moment. Then he pulled the boy into his arms and held him, and Noah, who was 4, and therefore had no concept of the kind of fear that had just moved through his father in the last 20 minutes, patted Ethan's back with one small hand in a gesture of vague reassurance. Amelia sat back on her heels in the hay and let the cold finish settling and looked at the two of them and felt something she didn't have a name for yet. Something that had to do with the barn lamp and the warmth of the hay and the boy's hand patting his father's back and the storm outside being what it was, enormous and indifferent and outside, and them being in here. Ethan looked at her over Noah's head. He looked at her for a long moment. Thank you, he said. Not the polite thank you of a man being gracious, the other kind, the kind that means, I understood what you just did and I know what it cost and I won't forget it. The barn was the logical place, she said, kept her voice even. Still, he said. She stood and he stood with Noah tucked against his side, and they came back through the storm together, Ethan in front with the boy shielded against him, Amelia 1 step behind and to the side, and the wind was still enormous and the snow was still horizontal, and she kept her hand on Ethan's coat sleeve, not for herself, but to maintain the line of contact so they didn't lose each other in the white, and he didn't pull away. Inside, Rose had hot water going. She looked at Noah and then at Amelia with an expression that had no calculation in it. Just relief, clean and unguarded, the kind you don't have time to perform. I couldn't find him anywhere in the house, she said. I was... She stopped, looked at her brother. Noah Blackwood, you are not allowed to scare me like that. Sorry, Rose, Noah said without much conviction. To bed, Ethan said. I'll bring the hot water bottle up. He carried Noah upstairs. Rose stood in the kitchen with the kettle and looked at Amelia, who was dripping melted snow onto the boot room floor and feeling the cold work its way out of her ears in the specific painful way of blood returning to frozen extremities. You went out in that, Rose said. He loves that barn cat, Amelia said. Rose looked at her for a moment. She turned back to the stove and said quietly, without making a declaration of it, There's tea when you're ready. Amelia changed out of her wet things and came back to the kitchen, and they sat at the table together, Rose and Amelia, with the storm outside and the house warm around them, and they drank their tea without needing it to be more than it was. That was the night things changed. Not visibly, not dramatically. No declarations were made. Nothing was resolved in the way that stories sometimes resolve things too cleanly. But something had been established in the dark and the storm and the cold barn, something that went beyond what either of them would have said out loud. When it matters, I go. That was what Amelia had shown. When it comes to this family, when it is genuinely dark and cold and frightening, I go. The storm lasted 3 days. Ethan and Gil worked the ranch in brutal rotations, keeping the livestock fed and watered, checking the outbuildings, managing the damage as it happened rather than waiting for it to stop. Thomas insisted on helping, and Ethan let him, with conditions, and Amelia watched Thomas come in each evening with that particular combination of exhaustion and satisfaction that is the specific reward of hard, necessary work. And she thought, that boy is going to be all right. He's going to be more than all right. She ran the house. She did it not by taking over from Rose, but by working beside her. And somewhere in those 3 days of enforced proximity and shared purpose, the shape of how they could work together became something real. Rose knew the household deeply, where everything was, what the routines were, what each child needed. And Amelia had a certain kind of practical problem-solving instinct that worked well under pressure, and the combination of those two things turned out to be better than either alone. Rose said so on the second day, bluntly, in the way she said all honest things. You're useful in a crisis. You're useful before one, Amelia said. Rose thought about that. That's fair, she said. It was on the third evening, with the storm beginning to exhaust itself, that Clara came downstairs at 9 o'clock with her quilt around her shoulders and her hair in one braid instead of two, and the look on her face that meant she'd been lying awake thinking. There's something wrong with Lily, she said. The word wrong from Clara's mouth at 9 at night, during the tail end of a 3-day blizzard, landed with immediate weight. Amelia was up before the sentence finished. Lily was in her bed with a fever that had come on fast, the bad kind of fast, the kind that means the body has been fighting something quietly for a while and has finally lost the battle of subtlety. She was hot to the touch, and her eyes were glassy, and she was alternating between the shivering and the strange not shivering that meant the fever was spiking. And when Amelia put the back of her hand against the girl's forehead, she thought, this is serious. She went to the hallway and called Ethan's name clearly. He appeared at the top of the back stairs. He'd come in from checking the animals, still in his work coat, and looked at her face and came immediately. He sat on the edge of Lily's bed and looked at his daughter with the focused, silent assessment of a father who has been through childhood illness before, and Amelia could see him calculating what he knew, what he'd seen, whether this was the ordinary kind of sick or the other kind. How long has she been like this? He said. I don't know. Clara came to get me just now. Lily... She looked at the girl. Lily, how long have you felt bad? Lily's eyes focused slowly. Since yesterday morning, she said. I didn't want to say. Rose had too much to worry about. Rose, who had followed Amelia in from the hallway, made a sound that was not a word. She came to the other side of the bed and took Lily's hand and held it with both of hers. You should have said, she said. Her voice was tight with the thing she was controlling. I know, Lily said. Sorry, Rose. The doctor was in Millhaven. 8 miles away, on roads that were still impassable from the storm. Ethan said this plainly, without catastrophe in his voice, and Amelia heard it plainly and nodded. "All right," she said. "We manage it tonight. We bring the fever down and we keep fluids in her, and we watch her through the night. By morning the road should be better, and if she's not improving, Gil goes for the doctor." She looked at Ethan. "Tell me what you have in the medicine chest." He showed her. She worked through what they had with the methodical focus of someone who had grown up in a farmhouse where the nearest doctor was 30 miles away, and her mother had kept a thick-spined medical reference book in the kitchen drawer alongside the recipes, and she'd read that book cover to cover by age 12. She knew what to do. She wasn't certain it was enough, but she knew what to do. She and Rose kept watch in shifts. Amelia took the first half of the night, and Rose took the second, and somewhere between 3 and 4 in the morning, when Amelia had passed the watch to Rose and gone to her room to lie down for 2 hours, she lay flat on her back in the dark and stared at the ceiling and let herself feel for the first time how frightened she was. Not the managed fear of someone doing what needs to be done. The real fear underneath it, the love that had apparently been forming without her permission, forming in the accumulated weight of oatmeal mornings and arithmetic afternoons and storms and barn cats and letters written by a woman who knew she was leaving, and Lily's 40 questions and Lily's PMAPs and Lily's unwillingness to be a burden even when she was burning up with fever. She pressed both palms flat against the quilt. She thought, "These children are mine. Not by blood, not by ceremony, not yet by any name, but they are mine." She thought, "I am not leaving this house." By morning, Lily's fever had broken. Not gone. She was still sick, still flushed and tired and fragile, but broken. The worst of it passed. And when Amelia came in at first light, Rose was sitting in the chair beside the bed with the quilt around her shoulders and Lily's hand in hers, and Rose looked up at Amelia and said, without performing anything, "She's better." "Yes," Amelia said. "You knew what to do," Rose said. Not a question. "I knew enough." Rose looked at her sister, sleeping more peacefully now, and then back at Amelia. "She's going to want a story when she wakes up. She always wants a story when she's been sick." A pause. "She'll probably want you to tell it." "Me?" "She asked for you twice in the night." Rose's voice was even. "She asked where Amelia was." Amelia stood in the doorway of the room in the early morning light and felt that land. She asked where Amelia was. She went down to start the stove and put the coffee on and stood at the kitchen window looking at the ranch in the aftermath of the storm. The snow deep and undisturbed in the yard, the tracks where Ethan and Gil had worked through it, the barn with its lamp still faintly visible in the pale morning, and the sky above it all going from gray to the particular clear cold blue that came after Wyoming storms, hard and clean and enormous. And she thought about what Margaret had written. Maybe someone with the right kind of stubborn love can build something in the same ground. Stubborn love. Yes, that was the accurate phrase for what this was. Not the comfortable kind, not the kind that arrived all at once with certainty, but the kind that built itself day by day in cold kitchens and barn runs and fever vigils, in arithmetic lessons and coffee cups and letters read by lamplight, the kind you had to choose every morning even when the morning was hard, even when you were exhausted and cold and uncertain whether any of it was working, the kind you chose anyway, because you already couldn't imagine not choosing it. Ethan appeared in the kitchen at 6:30. He'd slept, barely, and he looked it, but when he looked at her, the question in his eyes was the only one that mattered, and she answered it before he asked. "She's better. Fever broke around 3. He let out a breath. He stood in the kitchen doorway and just breathed for a moment, and she turned back to the stove and gave him the space to do it. Then he said, "You stayed up all night. Rose and I took shifts, but you were the one—" He stopped, started again. "Amelia." She turned. He was standing in the middle of his kitchen with his coat still on and his hair not yet combed and something in his face that he wasn't working to control the way he usually did. Something open in it. Something that had been there building for a while and was now simply present. "I don't know how to say this the right way, Wes," he said. "You don't have to say it the right way," she said. Just say it." He looked at her for a moment. "I was afraid. And you were steady, and I thought—" He stopped. "I thought, this is who she is. This is not what she came here to be. This is who she is." The kitchen was quiet, the stove ticked. Outside, the blue sky was sharpening at the horizon. "I know I'm not what you expected when you wrote that first letter," she said. "You're more," he said, simply. "You're considerably more." She held his gaze and felt the warmth of the stove against her back and the cold still coming off the window glass. And somewhere upstairs the sound of the house waking. A door, a footstep. Noah's voice announcing something to no one in particular. And she thought, this is it. This right here. This is what she came across the frozen frontier for. And it was not what she pictured, not even close. And it was better in ways she hadn't known to want. She turned back to the stove. "Breakfast in 30 minutes, she said. "Go see your daughter." He went, and as he passed through the doorway, she heard him pause just briefly, and she didn't turn around, and he didn't say anything else, and neither did she, and it was enough. Lily recovered slowly, the way children do when they've been genuinely sick. Not the dramatic bounce back that adults hope for, but the gradual, fragile return of color and appetite, and the specific noise level that meant she was herself again. For 4 days she stayed in bed, and Amelia told her stories every afternoon, sitting in the chair Rose had occupied through the night of the fever's breaking, and the stories were not the polished kind, but the rambling, invented kind. Stories about a girl who could talk to horses, and a town where it snowed upward, and a cat who ran for territorial governor and lost by a narrow margin, and Lily listened with the focused pleasure of someone receiving exactly what they needed, and sometimes she fell asleep in the middle, and sometimes she asked questions that derailed the story entirely, and Amelia followed wherever the questions went. Rose watched this from the doorway once, didn't come in, just stood there for a moment, and then went back to whatever she'd been doing, and Amelia heard her go and didn't turn around. The doctor came on the second day after the storm cleared. A compact, efficient man named Dr. Aldrich, who had clearly been doing frontier medicine long enough that nothing surprised him, and who examined Lily with brisk thoroughness and pronounced it a respiratory infection, serious but past its worst, and left a tincture and instructions and accepted Ethan's payment with a nod that contained a degree of warmth for a man who didn't traffic much in warmth, which told Amelia he'd been in this house before during harder times and remembered it. He looked at Amelia on his way out the door. "You managed the fever correctly," he said. "The cold compresses and the fluids. Another few hours in that storm, and the boy would have been a different conversation." He paused, registering her expression. "The girl," he corrected. "I'm confusing your family with the Harmon place. Long week." "Is there anything else I should watch for?" she asked. He gave her a specific list, concise and usable, and she thanked him, and he left, and she went back inside to write down everything he'd said while it was fresh. Ethan found her at the kitchen table with the notepad 20 minutes later. He looked at what she was writing. "You write things down," he said. "I forget details if I don't." "Margaret did that," he said. Then he seemed to hear himself and went to pour coffee without further comment. She kept writing. The thing Ethan had said in the kitchen the morning after Lily's fever, "You're considerably more," sat between them in the days that followed like an object placed on a table that neither of them had moved yet. Not awkwardly, more like they were both aware of it and were operating around it with a kind of careful deliberateness, waiting for the right moment without either of them being willing to be the first to name what the right moment would look like. The children had no such patience. It was Noah who was most transparent about it, because Noah was 4 and had not yet learned to have interior thoughts that stayed interior. At breakfast one morning in the 3rd week of February, he looked at Ethan and then at Amelia, and then at Ethan again, and said, with the tone of someone raising a practical concern, "When Amelia is our mama, can President sleep inside?" The table went quiet in the specific way tables go quiet, when something has been said that lands squarely in the middle of something everyone was already thinking about. Ethan set down his coffee cup. Rose looked at her plate. Thomas became very interested in his biscuit. Clara, across the table, met Amelia's eyes with an expression that communicated, clearly and without apology, that she had known this was coming and had elected not to warn anyone. Noah, Ethan said. What? Noah looked around at the silence with complete genuine bewilderment. President is very cold in the barn. President, Ethan said carefully, is a barn cat who has survived 4 Wyoming winters with considerable success. He'd be warmer inside. We'll discuss the cat separately, Ethan said. Eat your oatmeal. Noah ate his oatmeal. The table resumed its noise. But the thing had been said now, and it was out in the air of the kitchen, and nothing was going to put it back. And Amelia kept her eyes on her own plate and felt the warmth in her face and thought, 4-year-olds are the most honest creatures on earth, and sometimes that is a profound inconvenience. After breakfast, after the children had dispersed toward lessons and chores, Ethan appeared in the kitchen doorway while Amelia was washing the bowls. I should apologize for that, he said. You didn't say it, she pointed out. I know, but I should have. I should have said something before Noah said it at the breakfast table, which is a fairly undignified venue for... He stopped, rubbed the back of his neck. I'm doing this badly. She turned from the sink and looked at him. He was standing in the doorway with his coat half on, the way he always was in the mornings, already halfway out the door toward the work that waited. And she thought, this man runs toward hard physical problems and retreats from hard emotional ones with equal consistency. And she had known that about him since the 3rd letter, and she had come here anyway. What is it you want to say? She asked. Just say it plainly. He looked at her. When your month was up, the agreement, the trial period, you never mentioned it. She hadn't thought about the trial period in weeks. No? She said. Why not? Because I'd already decided I was staying, she said. Mentioning the agreement felt like suggesting I might not. He stood in the doorway looking at her with that expression she'd come to know, the one that meant he was working towards something and was going to take the route there that felt least like exposure. The children need... He started. Ethan. She kept her voice gentle but clear. Don't start with the children. He stopped. The children are a real reason, she said. They're a good reason, but they're not the only one, and if you start there, we'll have a very strange conversation. She turned back to the sink. Come back inside for 10 minutes and tell me what you actually mean. He came inside. He sat down at the kitchen table, which she had never seen him do in the middle of a morning, and she finished the bowls and dried her hands and sat across from him. He looked at his hands on the table. I don't know how to do this without it sounding like a business proposition, he said, because it started as one, and I'm aware of that. And I'm aware that what I want to say now is considerably different from what I wrote in that first letter. Tell me the difference, she said. He looked up. I wrote that I needed a capable woman who could survive the frontier and help keep the family together. He paused. What I want now is you, specifically, not a capable woman. You. Another pause. His voice had gone lower, not quieter, but more careful, the way people speak when they're handling something they don't want to drop. I didn't expect that. I want you to know I didn't expect it. And I'm not... I know it puts you in a position, because you came here under one set of terms, and what I'm asking is something different. The kitchen was very quiet. What are you asking? She said. To stay, he said. Not because of the agreement, not because the children need, not because of anything practical, because He stopped again. He was not a man accustomed to saying these things, and it showed, not unattractively, but humanly, like someone trying to speak in a language they'd learned from books, and were now attempting for the first time in a real conversation. Because when you went out into that storm after Noah, I stood in the doorway watching you go, and I thought, she doesn't have to do this. This is not in any letter, not in any agreement. She's going because she wants to. And I thought, he looked at her directly. I thought, I don't want to do any of this without her. The sentence landed and stayed. She looked at him across the kitchen table in the February morning light and thought about a small room in Missouri and a newspaper and a letter she'd answered the same afternoon. And she thought about 14 hours on a train and a girl dropping a letter on a floor and a wooden box behind the preserved peaches and a boy in a barn in a blizzard and a fever in the dark of the night. And she thought about what Margaret had written. Maybe it doesn't have to stay ruins. I'm not leaving, she said. I told you that the first week. I meant it. I know you did, he said. I'm asking for more than that. She looked at him. I know you are. A moment. Yes, she said. He didn't ask her to clarify what the yes was to. He understood it. She could tell from the way his face changed, not dramatically, not the cinematic release of tension that stories usually give you, but the small quiet thing that happens to a person who has been braced for a long time and is now, carefully, beginning to unclench. All right, he said. He stood up because the work was still out there waiting for him, and the Herefords needed feeding, and the east fence still needed reinforcing after the storm, and Ethan Blackwood was not a man who sat still for long, even on mornings when his life rearranged itself. But he stopped at the kitchen doorway and turned back. President is still not sleeping inside, he said. She laughed. It surprised her, the fullness of it. That's between you and Noah. Noah is 4, he has no leverage. Noah has enormous leverage, and you know it. He almost smiled, that careful, slightly lopsided thing that his face did when it was being honest. And he went out to work. She sat at the kitchen table for another few minutes and listened to the house around her. Upstairs, Clara's voice, and then Lily's, the arithmetic lesson. Clara's patient repetition of the step Lily kept getting wrong. From the back hall, the sound of Thomas pulling on his work boots, the purposeful tread of a boy who'd decided to be useful. From somewhere outside, Gil's voice calling across the yard to Ethan. The kitchen smelled like coffee and wood smoke, and the particular smell of a house that has people living hard and close in it. She got up and started on the noon meal. It was Rose who was hardest to read in the days that followed. Not hostile, those days were gone, and the change was real and not fragile, but quieter than usual in a way that Amelia tracked without pushing. The girl was processing something. She was allowed to process it. It was on a Saturday, almost 2 weeks after the morning in the kitchen, that Rose came to find her in the storeroom, of all places, where Amelia was doing the monthly inventory and had finally, deliberately, opened the last jar of Margaret's peach preserves. She'd done it simply. Taken the jar down, opened it, smelled the sweetness of August in the middle of February, and she was sitting on the low stool with the jar in her lap when Rose appeared in the doorway and stopped. Her eyes went to the jar. A complicated thing moved through her face. I should have asked you first, Amelia said immediately. I'm sorry, I should have asked. Rose looked at the jar for a long moment. No, she said. No, she made them to be eaten. She came into the storeroom and crouched down and looked at the jar, not at Amelia. She said once that food you don't eat is just sadness in a jar. Amelia looked at the deep amber color of the preserves. She was right. She was right about most things, Rose said, annoyingly often. She sat down on the floor, which was not something Rose did. Rose was not a sit-on-the-floor person as a rule, and she leaned her back against the shelves and pulled her knees up. She looked tired. Not the tiredness of work, but the deeper kind. Clara told me what you said to her, in the arithmetic lesson, about what you needed when you came here. Which part? The part about people worth working for. Rose looked at her hands. I've been thinking about that, about what it means that you said it that way. Not people to take care of you, not security, not... You said worth working for, like we were something to be earned. You are, Amelia said. Rose was quiet for a moment. It makes it harder to be angry at you, she said. I want you to know that. I had reasons in order for why I was going to stay angry, and one by one they became insufficient. She said the last word with a wryness that was entirely her own, entirely Margaret's daughter. You're very annoying, actually. I've been told, Amelia said. By who? No one yet, but it felt like the kind of thing that would come up. Rose made a sound that was almost a laugh. She looked at the jar again. Papa told me. That you talked, that you said yes. She paused. He didn't use those words. He said you'd both decided you wanted to formalize the arrangement. He said it like a land contract. That sounds like him. He was smiling when he said it, Rose said. I haven't seen him smile like that in... She stopped. Something shifted in her face, something gentle and painful at the same time. A long time. Amelia didn't fill the silence. I'm not going to call you Mama, Rose said. Flatly, clearly, not unkindly. I want you to know that. I'm 17. It would be... I wouldn't expect it, Amelia said. I'd never ask it. The little ones might. Rose looked at her steadily. Lily already calls you Amelia in the way she used to call Mama. Mama, with that specific, you know what I mean, like it's home, not just a name. Amelia felt that in her chest. I know, she said quietly. Is that? Rose started, then seemed to decide something. Does that feel like a replacement to you? Does it feel like they're forgetting her? The real question, the one Rose had been carrying since January and hadn't been able to put down. Amelia took it seriously. No, she said. It feels like they're loving the way people love when they're safe enough to. That's not replacement. That's what she built in them. The capacity to love that freely. That's Margaret. She held Rose's gaze. They're not forgetting her. They're showing you what she gave them. Rose looked at her for a long time. Then she said carefully, She wrote in the letter that I'd be the hardest. She did. Was I? Amelia thought about it honestly. Yes, she said, but not in the way I expected. I thought hard meant hostile. What you actually were was precise. You were watching for specific things. You weren't going to be moved until you saw them. What things? Whether I'd stay when it was hard, whether I could be honest, whether I was taking something or adding something. Amelia paused. Whether I would understand what you'd done for this family without needing you to stop doing it. Rose looked at the shelf behind Amelia's shoulder. Something was working in her face that she wasn't trying to control for once, just letting it work. That last one, she said. Nobody said that before. I know. Rose pressed her lips together. She was not going to cry. That was evident. But she was close to something real, and she was choosing to stay there instead of pulling back from it, and Amelia thought, there she is. There's the girl who loved her mother like a house on fire. I don't know what to call you, Rose said finally. It would feel wrong to just... Amelia forever feels too much like you're the hired help, and anything else feels... It doesn't have to be decided today, Amelia said. Rose nodded. She stood up because she was Rose, and Rose did not sit on floors for extended periods, and she smoothed her skirt and looked at the jar. Open it, she said. Put some on the noon biscuits. Lily's been eating again, and she keeps asking for something sweet. All right. Rose turned to go. At the doorway she stopped, her back still to Amelia. She would have, she said. Liked you, I mean that. I said it once before, but I mean it differently now. A pause. She liked people who didn't flinch. You don't flinch. I flinch, Amelia said. I just do it on the inside. Rose made that almost laugh sound again and went back to the house. Amelia sat in the storeroom with the open jar of peach preserves and the smell of the last summer Margaret Blackwood had been alive, and she thought, this is what was meant, this right here. Not the easy version, not the version where she arrived and the children accepted her and the ranch was beautiful and the man fell in love with her in some uncomplicated pastoral way. This version, the hard, cold, grief-tangled, flower-covered, storm-blown version, with its split lips and midnight fevers and letters behind the peaches, and a girl who loved like a house on fire deciding, finally and carefully, to let someone stand close enough to feel the heat. The town of Millhaven had opinions about all of it, which Amelia learned in full on the first Saturday in March, when Ethan took her and the older children into town for supplies. She had been in Millhaven twice before, both times briefly, focused on the specific errand and back quickly, and she had not particularly registered the way people looked at them. She registered it now. It was the particular quality of small-town attention, not rude exactly, not aggressive, but present in a way that had shape to it, that had direction, that arrived at her from several angles in the dry goods store while she was comparing flower prices and felt like being watched from a height. The woman who said something said it to another woman in a voice calibrated precisely to be overheard. Amelia didn't know her name. She was perhaps 50, well-dressed for Millhaven, and she said it while Amelia's back was turned at the flower shelf. Blackwood's mail-order bride. Can you imagine? 5 children, and he went looking in a catalog. The other woman said something quiet that Amelia didn't catch. The first woman said, "What kind of woman answers something like that? You have to wonder what she's getting out of it." Amelia kept her hands on the flour sack, kept her face neutral. She had not been in this town long enough for the first woman to have any opinion of her based on anything real, which meant the opinion was entirely about the category, mail order, catalog, arrangement, and not about her at all, and she had enough self-possession not to let a category wound her. But it was Rose, 3 feet away with her basket, who moved first. Rose turned around from the canned goods shelf she'd been examining and looked directly at the woman with an expression so composed it was almost cold. "Her name is Amelia Whitmore," she said. "She's going to be my father's wife. She sat up through the night with my sister during a fever and went out into the February blizzard after my 4-year-old brother, and she can do more useful things in a single afternoon than most people manage in a week." She paused. "I'm Rose Blackwood. I don't believe we've met properly. Should we?" The woman blinked. Her companion found something very interesting to look at out the window. Rose turned back to the canned goods with the serene completeness of someone who has said everything that needed saying and considers the matter closed. Amelia looked at the back of Rose's head and felt something she could only describe as, "That is Margaret's daughter, right there, through and through." She picked up her flour sack and said nothing, because Rose had said everything, and adding to it would only dilute it. In the wagon going home, Ethan, who had been in the feed section and had heard about the exchange from Thomas, who had been near enough the canned goods to witness it, said to Rose, "You didn't have to do that." "I know," Rose said. "I was going to—" "Papa," Rose said with great patience. "I was right there and it needed saying, and I said it. It's done." Ethan looked at Amelia. Amelia looked back at him. He reached across the wagon seat and covered her hand with his for a moment, brief and steady, and then put his hand back on the reins. Thomas, in the back of the wagon between sacks of feed, said, "Rose made that woman go completely white. It was impressive." "It was appropriate," Clara said primly. "It was both," Thomas said. "I liked it," Lily said. She was still not fully herself, still slower, still slightly shadowed around the eyes. But she'd insisted on coming to town, and Ethan had let her, and she was sitting wrapped in her coat with her hands in her muff and the particular look of someone who is very pleased with their family. Rose sounded exactly like Mama when Mama used to tell off Mrs. Henderson about the school funding. A silence. The wagon moved. The road ran between white fields under a sky that was beginning, just barely, to show the first thin suggestion of a different season coming. Not warm, not yet, but less absolute in its cold, the quality of light changing by degrees. "She did. A little," Ethan said. His voice was even, measured, not guarding against the comment, but receiving it. "Rose does that sometimes." Rose was looking at the road ahead. "I know," she said, and then, more quietly, "I don't mind." The weeks that followed had a different rhythm, not easier exactly. The ranch in late winter was relentless. The work accumulated faster than it got done. And Ethan's East lease negotiation had come to a head and had taken 3 trips to Millhaven and a letter to a land attorney in Cheyenne before it resolved in a way that was not ideal but was livable. Amelia had helped with the accounting during that period at Ethan's request. Not request exactly. He'd put the ledger on the table and said she might want to look at it, and she'd looked at it, and they'd worked through it together over 4 evenings and found 2 places where the numbers could be shifted to make the lease feasible without cutting the household accounts entirely. "You're good at this," he said on the 4th evening. "I told you, I grew up reading the books." "You're better at it than I described," he said. "I should have been paying you." "You've been feeding and housing me," she said. "That's payment." He looked at her across the desk. "That's not the same thing." "No," she agreed, "but I wasn't here for pay." He held her gaze for a moment and then looked back at the ledger, and she looked back at the ledger, and the lamp burned between them, and the house was quiet with the particular quiet of 9 o'clock after children were asleep, and she thought, this is what contentment actually is. Not the holiday version, not the easy afternoon version, but the staying up late, going over the difficult numbers version. The one where you've chosen a specific life and a specific person, and you can see exactly how hard the life is, and you've chosen it anyway, and that choosing feels somehow like the most honest thing you've ever done. Noah got president moved to the back porch. This was presented as a compromise and treated by Noah as a total victory and by President as an acceptable interim arrangement while he continued his territorial expansion. Thomas started teaching Amelia to ride properly, not side saddle in the Missouri way, but the ranch way, which involved considerably more falling off than she'd anticipated and a bruise on her left hip that lasted 10 days and which she mentioned to no one. Thomas, to his credit, kept a straight face through most of it and said, "You're not a natural, but you're stubborn, which is better." And she took that as the highest compliment he knew how to give and did not inform him that she knew it. Clara asked her one morning in late March while they were working through an advanced arithmetic problem that had evolved into a broader conversation about how numbers describe the world, whether Amelia had ever wanted to teach. "Not specifically," Amelia said. "Why?" "You explain things the way Mrs. Poole at school should explain things and doesn't," Clara said. "You start from what I already know and build from there instead of starting from what I'm supposed to know and then acting confused when I don't know it." "That seems like the obvious way to do it," Amelia said. "It is," Clara said. "Most people don't." Amelia looked at this 12-year-old who had her dead mother's capacity for watching everything and her father's precision and something entirely her own, some quality of mind that was both warmer and sharper than either, and she thought, this child is going to be formidable. I want to be there to see it, and she would be. That was the thing. That was the difference between January and March. She would be there to see it. She was not a woman in transit anymore, passing through someone else's life on the way to wherever she was going. She was here. This was where she was going. And the distance between those two states, between passing through and arriving, was the distance between a life witnessed and a life lived, and she had crossed it somewhere in the middle of a Wyoming winter, in a house that smelled like wood smoke and peach preserves, and the particular shampoo Rose used on her hair on Sunday evenings, and she had crossed it without quite noticing the moment she did, which was probably how it always happened when it was real. The wedding was set for the first week of April. Not elaborate. Ethan had asked whether she wanted something larger, and she had said no, clearly, and he had looked relieved in a way that confirmed they were suited to each other in the fundamental ways. The children knew, Gil knew, and received the information with his characteristic nod that managed to convey both approval and the suggestion that he'd seen it coming from the wagon ride on the first day. The Millhaven Reverend was contacted, a date chosen, and the matter was treated in the Blackwood household with the practical energy of people who had a great deal else going on and were fitting a significant thing into the existing life rather than stopping the existing life to accommodate it. It was the evening before, when the children were in bed and the house was finally quiet, that Ethan found her sitting on the porch in the cold. Not the February cold, but the different, softer cold of early April. The cold that was loosening at the edges and letting in something that smelled like mud and meltwater, and the beginning of something green. And he sat down beside her on the porch step. They sat for a while without talking. Across the yard, the barn lamp was on. Somewhere in the darkness, President was conducting whatever business he conducted after dark. "Are you all right?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "I'm just sitting with it." "With what?" She looked at the yard, at the dark shape of the outbuildings against the sky, at the way the Blackwood Ranch looked under the early April stars, solid and particular and real. "I came here thinking I knew what I needed," she said. "I had a clear idea of it. Stability, purpose, a life with enough in it to fill the quiet." She paused. "I had no idea. I had a sketch of a thing, and what I actually got was the thing itself, in full, with all the weight and complexity of the actual thing, and it was nothing like the sketch." She turned to look at him. "I'm grateful for that, for it being nothing like I imagined. The imagined version would have been considerably smaller." He looked at her. He reached over and took her hand, and his hand was rough from the work and warm despite the cold, and he held it without making a speech of it, and she held it back. "I wrote 11 letters," he said. "I said everything I could think of to say about the ranch and the children and what the life was like, and I still managed to leave out most of the actual thing." "You told me about Noah and the cat," she said. That was the important part. He made a sound that was almost a laugh. That's what decided it for you? The cat? The way you wrote about it, she said, like it genuinely delighted you. A man who can be genuinely delighted by a 4-year-old's cat politics. That was the man I thought I could build a life with. He was quiet for a moment. That's an extremely low bar, he said. It's not low, she said. You'd be surprised how rare it is. They sat on the porch in the early April cold, and the stars were very clear overhead, and the ranch was quiet around them, the quiet of a place that had absorbed a winter's worth of difficulty and was now, tentatively, loosening towards something else. And Amelia Whitmore sat beside the man she was going to marry tomorrow and felt, for the first time since she'd packed her trunk in Missouri, that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Not because it was easy, not because it was what she'd pictured, but because she had worked for every inch of it, and it was real in the way that only earned things are real, solid all the way through, with no hollow center. Inside the house, someone moved. A door, a footstep, one of the children up for water or a blanket, or whatever reason children found at this hour. The sound moved through the house and went quiet again, and the house held it the way the house held everything. The grief and the work and the love that was growing in the same ground as the grief, not replacing it, but rooting alongside it, feeding from the same deep water. She turned her face up toward the stars and breathed the cold April air and thought, tomorrow. The morning of the wedding was unremarkable in the way that mornings before significant things often are. The stove needed starting, the oatmeal needed stirring. Noah came downstairs with hay in his hair from an unauthorized pre-dawn visit to the barn that nobody asked about directly, and President was discovered on the back porch wearing what appeared to be a small piece of blue ribbon around his neck that matched the ribbon from Margaret's letterbox, which meant Rose had put it there, which meant something about Rose that neither Amelia nor Ethan remarked on aloud. The ceremony itself was small. The Reverend came to the house rather than the church, which had been Amelia's preference and which Ethan had arranged without comment. Gil stood in the parlor in the clean shirt he wore to town, holding his hat in front of him with both hands. The children arranged themselves in descending order of height along the far wall, Clara having apparently organized this without being asked, and Noah was wearing his cape blanket over his good clothes because there had been a negotiation about this and Noah had won, which was not surprising. Rose stood nearest to her father. The Reverend said the words that reverends say, and Ethan said his words carefully, the way he did most things, not quickly and not with the performing quality that some men brought to moments like these. He said them the way he'd written those first letters, plainly, with the weight of someone who understood what a promise meant and was choosing to make it with full knowledge. Amelia said her words, and her voice was steady all the way through except on the last phrase, where it went slightly rough, and she did not apologize for that. When it was done, Lily cried. She did it cheerfully, wiping her face with her sleeve, and said, "I'm not sad, I'm the other kind," which Noah found philosophically interesting and wanted to discuss at length, but Clara redirected him toward the cake that Rose had made, which was a yellow cake with a honey glaze, and which Rose set on the table with the precise movements of someone who has put a great deal of care into something and is trying not to show how much. Thomas shook Ethan's hand. It was a formal thing, deliberate, the grip of a boy practicing being a man, and Ethan received it seriously and shook back. Clara kissed Amelia on the cheek, quickly, and then went to help distribute plates with the composed efficiency that was entirely her own. Gil said, "Congratulations, Mrs. Blackwood," and there was the slightest emphasis on the name, not unkind but intentional, like he was testing the sound of it in the air, and Amelia heard it and thought, yes, that's who I am now, and the strangeness of it lasted about 4 seconds before it felt simply true. Noah ate 2 pieces of cake and fell asleep on the parlor rug with President, who had apparently been led inside for the occasion on a temporary diplomatic basis. Rose was the last one. After the plates were cleared and the Reverend had gone and Gil had returned to the barn and the younger children were occupied in the other room, Rose found Amelia in the kitchen doing what Amelia did after events that had feeling in them. Something useful, something with her hands, in this case washing the cake plates. Rose came and stood beside her and picked up the drying cloth without being asked, and they did the dishes together in the quiet. "I've been thinking about what to call you," Rose said after a while. Amelia kept washing. You said you didn't have to decide. I know, but I've been thinking about it anyway. A pause. Rose dried a plate in the careful, deliberate way she did most things. There's a word in... I read it somewhere. It's from another language. It means the woman who comes after. The one who steps into a role that already had someone in it and makes it her own without erasing what was there before. She set the plate on the stack. I don't have a word like that in English, but that's what I've been thinking of you as. Amelia kept her eyes on the dish in her hands. You don't have to call me anything specific, she said. You can just... I know, Rose said. I'm just telling you what I've been thinking. Another plate. For now, I'll probably just say your name, but I wanted you to know what's behind it. Amelia nodded. The water in the basin had gone slightly cold. That's enough, she said quietly. That's more than enough. The spring came in the way Wyoming spring came. Not gently, not all at once, but in arguments, warm days conceding back to cold, mud freezing and thawing in cycles, the grass coming up in patches, and then getting snowed on and coming up again, more stubborn each time. Amelia learned to read the land through Ethan's attention to it. He'd look at the eastern ridge in the morning with a particular quality of focus that meant weather coming, or he'd check the creek level with a different quality that meant he was calculating the timing of the snowmelt and the spring calving, and she watched how he read the land, and she began to learn the same language. The east grazing lease was secured in late March at a rate that was manageable, thanks largely to the accounting reorganization she and Ethan had worked through over those 4 evenings. Gil said nothing about this directly, but started including her in the barn conversations about herd rotation that he'd previously had only with Ethan, which was Gil's version of a significant acknowledgement. Thomas, by April, was working alongside the men in the mornings before his lessons, which Ethan allowed as long as the lessons weren't sacrificed. And Thomas was careful not to sacrifice them because he'd found, somewhere in the winter, that Clara's habit of reading everything she could get her hands on was something he wanted to imitate. And he'd been borrowing Amelia's books, which he noticed and encouraged by leaving the next obvious one, where he'd find it without it being a gift he had to respond to. Clara turned 13 in May and asked for, as her birthday consideration, a proper lesson in the ranch accounts. Ethan looked at Amelia. Amelia looked at Clara. Why? Amelia asked. Because I'm going to run something someday, Clara said. I don't know what yet, but I'll need to understand the numbers from the ground up, not just the arithmetic. She said it without arrogance, just the clean statement of someone who had looked at themselves clearly and reported what they found. You understand them from the ground up. I'd rather learn from you than from a book. Ethan said, She's 13. I could read the cattle rotation ledger when I was 12, Amelia said. He looked at her. Just noting, she said. Clara got her lessons. She was, as Amelia had expected, faster than the material for the first month and then genuinely challenged by it. And the challenge delighted her in the way that only people with real intellectual appetite are delighted by being challenged. And Amelia taught her the way she'd explained to Clara she would, starting from what was known and building, never assuming, never performing confusion at a question. It was during one of these lessons, a Tuesday in June, that Clara looked up from the ledger and said without any particular build-up, Do you miss Missouri? Amelia thought about it honestly. I miss having known a place long enough to know all its small things, she said. The way a new place takes time to settle into your bones. I'm still settling. Does it feel different now? Clara asked, than when you first came. Everything is different now, Amelia said. In what way? She thought about January, the train, the cold, the letter dropped on the floor. She thought about the storeroom and the wooden box and the fever and the barn and the wedding cake and the blue ribbon on President's neck. In January, I was trying to earn a place here, she said. Now the place is just mine. I don't have to earn it anymore. It's done. She paused. That's the difference between trying to belong somewhere and actually belonging. Clara absorbed this with the focused attention she brought to information she intended to keep. That sounds like it took work. It did, Amelia said. Most things that matter do. Clara nodded and went back to the ledger. What Amelia did not say, and would not have known how to say to a 13-year-old without it becoming something maudlin, was that the work had changed her in ways she was still finding. She had come west with the particular loneliness of a person who has lived inside their own life for too long. Not unhappy exactly, but insufficient, like a room with one window facing the wrong direction. She'd thought what she needed was stability, and she had been wrong. What she'd needed was stakes. Something real enough to be hard. Something that pushed back. The ranch pushed back. The winter pushed back. The children, Rose above all, had pushed back, and the pushing had made her find things in herself she hadn't known were there, because no situation had required them yet. She was not the same woman who had answered that newspaper notice in her small Missouri kitchen. That woman had been competent and lonely and brave in the abstract way of someone who hasn't been tested yet. What she was now was something different, harder in some places, softer in others, and certain, deeply, specifically certain, about who she was and where she was and what she was for. The summer moved with the particular speed of a season that is full. The calving had gone well, better than the previous year, according to Gill, and the east grazing made a tangible difference in the herd's condition through June and July. The ranch accounts improved enough that Ethan was able to repair the barn roof and replace 2 of the outbuilding walls before August, work he'd deferred for 2 years. He did some of it himself with Thomas alongside him, and Thomas came inside those evenings filthy and bone-tired and ate 3 full plates of supper and grew, visibly, across the summer into something closer to the man he was going to be. Lily recovered fully and returned to her 40 questions a meal and her P-territorial maps and her absolute conviction that licorice was worth at least $1.50 by any objective metric. She had also, sometime in April, started calling Amelia Mama. Not with announcement, not with ceremony. Just one morning at breakfast she'd said, "Mama, can I have more oatmeal?" and then continued talking to Noah about something completely unrelated, as if she hadn't just laid down something significant. And Amelia had put more oatmeal in her bowl and said yes, and that had been the entire transaction. She'd cried about it later, in the storeroom, alone, quickly, and then washed her face and gone back to the kitchen. Noah followed within a week, which surprised no one. Clara, characteristically, did not make the transition quickly or unconsciously. She thought about it, which was clear from the 6 weeks during which she deployed various careful circumlocutions to avoid calling Amelia anything directly. Then one afternoon she said, "Mama," in the middle of an accounting lesson with the same matter-of-fact quality she brought to everything, and when Amelia looked at her, Clara met her eyes steadily and said, "I've decided it's the accurate word," and returned to the ledger. Thomas took until late July. He said it once, gruffly, in the barn while they were working on something mechanical that needed 2 sets of hands, and he needed to get her attention quickly. And it came out like it had always been there, waiting, and he just hadn't gotten around to using it yet. He didn't acknowledge that he'd said it, and she didn't make him. Rose did not say it. Rose continued to say Amelia, and Amelia continued to understand what was behind it, and that was its own complete thing. It was on a Saturday in August, almost exactly 7 months after the train from Missouri, that the Millhaven Summer Fair brought most of the territory into town, and Ethan took the entire family, which was the first public occasion they'd all attended together as what they now were. Not Ethan Blackwood and his children and the woman from the advertisement, but a family with a shape to it that had been forged over a winter and spring and was now simply visible to anyone who looked. People looked. Millhaven was not a large town, and the Blackwood name was known, and the story was known, or the version of the story that had circulated, which was not entirely accurate but contained the general outline. Amelia felt the attention the way she'd felt it in the dry goods store in March, present, directional, with shape to it. But it was different now. In March, she'd been a newcomer absorbing the judgment of a place that hadn't decided what she was yet. Now she was Amelia Blackwood, and this was her family, and the town could have whatever opinion it was going to have, and the opinion would simply have to accommodate itself to the fact of her. It was the same woman from the dry goods store who approached them near the pie tables. She came with a different manner this time, not the oblique, calculated to be overheard manner, but directly, which Amelia had not expected and which she found, oddly, easier to respect. The woman's name turned out to be Mrs. Hargrove, and she came with her hands clasped in front of her and looked at Amelia with the specific expression of someone who has been thinking about a thing for 5 months and has come to a conclusion. "Mrs. Blackwood," she said. "Mrs. Hargrove," Amelia said. She knew the name by now. Millhaven was not so large that 7 months hadn't taught her most of the relevant names. "I behaved poorly," Mrs. Hargrove said. Clipped, not warm, but direct. "In March. In the dry goods store. I had an opinion formed entirely from a category and no actual information, and I said it where you could hear me. That was wrong." She looked at Rose briefly. "Your daughter. Both times I've encountered her, she has been considerably more impressive than most adults I know. I wanted to say that as well." Rose received this with the composure of someone who has had Margaret Blackwood's quality of self-possession baked into her since childhood and is not easily made uncertain by external assessments. "Thank you," she said. "That's accurate." Amelia nearly laughed. She kept it to a slight tightening at the corner of her mouth. Mrs. Hargrove, for her part, looked at Rose for a moment and then did something Amelia hadn't expected. She smiled genuinely and said, "Yes, I suppose it is," and moved on. Ethan appeared at Amelia's shoulder from wherever he'd been with the feed merchants. He looked at Mrs. Hargrove's retreating back and then at Amelia. "What was that?" "An apology," Amelia said. "From Hargrove?" He looked genuinely surprised. "People can surprise you," Amelia said. He looked at her sideways. "You said something to her." "I said nothing. Rose said something. To her credit, she came to correct it." He was quiet for a moment. "How many people are watching us right now?" he said. Not bothered by it, just noting. "Several," Amelia said. "Let them." He looked at her. There was something in his face, not dramatic, not sweeping, just the steady, particular warmth of a man who knows he is exactly where he is supposed to be, with exactly the person he is supposed to be with. He put his hand at her back, the light, firm pressure of it, and they walked forward into the noise and color of the fair, and the children scattered ahead of them like startled birds. And Rose and Thomas took different directions toward different things, and Lily grabbed Amelia's hand and pulled her toward the pie tables, and Noah walked solemnly beside Ethan, conducting what appeared to be a policy discussion about President's ongoing land rights. She let Lily pull her. She let the fair noise and the August heat and the smell of wood smoke and baked things come over her, and she thought about what she knew now that she had not known in January. She knew that belonging was not a thing you found. She had looked for it in Missouri for years, had kept expecting to wake up one morning and simply feel it, the sense of fit, the sense of rightness, the sense that the life around her was the life that was hers. It had never come. And she had come to understand over the course of a Wyoming winter that belonging was not a thing you found. It was a thing you built, with your hands and your time and your willingness to stay when staying was hard, with your willingness to go out into the storm and be afraid and go anyway, with your willingness to read other people's letters and understand what they were leaving behind and treat it carefully, with your willingness to not win the argument with a 17-year-old, but to wait, to be patient, to let the trust build in its own time rather than the time you preferred. She knew that love, the real, lasting, useful kind, did not arrive. It accrued. It was not the feeling you had in the beginning, that sharp, particular recognition, though that mattered too. It was the feeling you had at the end of a hard month when you looked across the kitchen table at someone and thought, "I have chosen you every single morning and I will choose you again tomorrow." It was not a feeling that descended. It was a practice. It was a choice made daily, in the ordinary light of ordinary mornings, and the choosing was the thing itself, not the arrival. She knew that family was not the people you started with. She had started with nobody, in a small Missouri kitchen with 3 people who would notice she was gone, and she had crossed a continent and a winter and come out the other side with 5 children and a husband and a barn cat with political ambitions, and none of it had happened because she was owed it or because the universe had organized itself in her favor. It had happened because she had shown up and stayed and worked for every inch of it and had been willing, this above all, had been willing to love people who were not yet ready to love her back, and to trust that the willingness itself was sufficient, that love offered without guarantee was not love wasted, but love doing its most essential work. She did not think of herself as exceptional. She was aware that she'd gotten things wrong, There had been moments in January and February where her patience had frayed in the interior, where she'd gone to her room and sat on the edge of the quilt and thought, "This is too hard. This is too much. I cannot make these people want me here." She had made mistakes in the accounting. She had not always said the right thing to Thomas, who required a specific kind of approach she'd had to learn by feeling. There had been a morning in March where she and Ethan had disagreed about the East Fence decision in a way that got sharp before it got resolved. And she'd been wrong about one part of it, and had said so directly, which he'd received with the particular look of a man who had not entirely expected to be told he was right by a woman who'd been told she was wrong, and it had been awkward for approximately half a day. And then it had been fine. Better than fine. More real. She was not extraordinary. She was stubborn and observant and willing to stay, and in the specific conditions of that specific winter, those things had been enough. Maybe that was the lesson. Maybe that was all there was to say about it in the end, that the things that look ordinary from the outside, but the staying, the patience, the willingness to work without immediate return, were not ordinary in their doing. They were the whole of it. They were what love actually was when you stripped away the version of it that songs and stories told you to expect. Lily was pulling her toward the apple pie. "This one," Lily said, "the one with the crumble top. Mrs. Aldrich makes this, and it is the best one every single year, and I want a piece before Thomas gets there because Thomas eats an entire piece in about 4 bites, and then he looks at everyone else's." "That's a reasonable concern," Amelia said. "It's an urgent concern," Lily said. She bought Lily the apple pie with the crumble top, and they stood in the August shade eating it from paper plates, and Lily talked without pause about the fair and the pie and the horse, in the third stall from the left of the fairground barn that she had decided was secretly noble despite its undistinguished appearance. And Amelia listened to every word with the full attention that Lily deserved and had always deserved. The attention of someone who finds the person in front of them genuinely interesting, which Amelia did. She found all of them genuinely interesting, these improbable children who had become hers through no mechanism except the accumulated weight of ordinary days. Ethan found her an hour later near the edge of the fairground, where the noise thinned out and you could hear the wind in the long grass beyond the fence line. He had Noah asleep on his shoulder, which happened at fairs. The stimulation caught up with the 4-year-old fast. And he stood beside her, and they looked at the open country beyond the fence, the summer brown Wyoming grass running out toward the hills, the sky enormous overhead. "All right?" he said. "Very," she said. He shifted Noah's weight and looked at the hills. "Gil thinks the north pasture will need refencing before winter. That's a significant project." "I saw the post last week," she said. "He's right." "I know, I was hoping he wasn't." A pause. "Thomas said he wants to help with the fencing. Actually said he wants to, not asked permission, said he wants to." "He told me," Amelia said. "He's been reading about fence post setting. He borrowed the manual from your desk." Ethan looked at her sideways. "You knew that?" "He left it at the wrong angle on the shelf," she said. "Thomas always replaces things at exactly the right angle. He was in a hurry." He looked at her with that expression, the one she'd first seen in the kitchen the morning after Lily's fever. The open one, the one he'd stopped working to conceal. "You pay attention to everything," he said. "It's useful," she said. "It's more than useful," he said. The same way he'd said you're considerably more in the kitchen that February morning, simply, directly, with the full weight of a man who does not say things he doesn't mean. Everything that's gotten better this year, the accounts, the children, Thomas, you've had a hand in all of it. I want you to know I see that." She looked at the hills. "I'm not keeping a ledger of it. I know. That's one of the reasons I see it." He shifted Noah again, and Noah made a small sound and burrowed into his father's shoulder without waking. "I was thinking about last winter, what it looked like from the outside when you first got here, what this family looked like." "It looked like a family that was managing," she said, "which is not the same as being all right." "No," he said, "it isn't." He was quiet for a moment. "I kept thinking, after Margaret died, that the goal was to get back to what we had before, to restore it. Get the household functioning, get the children stable, get the ranch running the way it used to run. He looked at Noah's small sleeping face against his shoulder. I was trying to go back to a thing instead of forward to a different thing. And that, he paused, that was making it harder than it needed to be. You don't try to go back. I know that now. You couldn't have shown me that without being exactly who you are. She looked at him. I'm not easy to know, she said. I'm aware of that. No, he agreed. You're precise and private, and you don't ask for help with the hard things, and you'd rather go out in a blizzard than admit you're frightened. He met her eyes. You're extremely recognizable, actually. She looked at him for a moment and then looked back at the hills. That's an annoyingly accurate observation. I pay attention too, he said. Sometimes. The sun was going toward the western hills, and the fair noise behind them had softened into the general murmur of a crowd in the late afternoon, full and tired and satisfied. And the wind moved the grass beyond the fence in long, slow waves, and Noah slept on his father's shoulder, and the hills went gold and amber, and Amelia Blackwood stood in the Wyoming summer and felt the shape of her life around her. The full, real, complicated shape of it, heavy in the right places and wide in the ways she'd needed it to be wide. And she thought, yes, this is the thing. Years later, not many, but enough that the children were different and the ranch was different, and certain things had become so habitual they'd lost the quality of choice and simply become the texture of living. Rose would tell people, when they asked, that her father's second wife was not someone who had come to replace her mother. She would say it clearly and without particular emotion, the way she said true things. She would say that Amelia Blackwood had come, instead, to add something to a house that had been trying to survive on what it had left, and that the difference between surviving and living was, as her mother had once said about fruit in February, everything. Thomas became the rancher Ethan had seen coming from the winter. Thomas spent learning to work in the cold, and he ran the East operations with a precision that was half Blackwood's stubbornness and half something he'd absorbed from Amelia, the habit of understanding the numbers from the ground up before making a decision, the habit of watching the small things, because the small things were where the real information lived. Clara went to a school in Cheyenne at 16 and came back with ideas that made Ethan's eyebrows go up and made Amelia listen for 2 hours straight at the kitchen table and then say, yes, let's think about how to make that work. Because that was what Amelia did. She thought about how to make things work. It was her most fundamental quality and her most useful one, and it had saved this family in one form or another more times than anyone had counted. Lily grew into a woman with Lily's exact qualities: the warmth, the 40 questions, the absolute certainty about the monetary value of things she loved. And she married a man from the next county who had enough patience for the questions and enough humor for the certainty, and who ate his first piece of Lily's pie and said, "This is worth at least a penny and a half." And Lily considered this an excellent beginning. Noah grew up believing, without reservation, that the people who loved you showed up. He believed this because it had been demonstrated to him, repeatedly, in the most direct possible terms. In the middle of a blizzard, in a barn, in the dark, someone had come. He built his adult life around that belief in ways that were sometimes costly and always correct. And when people asked him where he'd gotten his fundamental conviction that love was a verb and not a feeling, he would say, without hesitation, from the woman who came and found me. And Amelia Blackwood, née Whitmore, of Missouri and Wyoming, and the long, cold journey between, grew into the ranch the way you grow into a place when you've decided it's yours and poured enough of yourself into it that the line between you and the land starts to blur at the edges. She was not gentle exactly. She had never been gentle exactly. But she was steady, and steadiness turned out to be the thing that this particular place and this particular family had needed more than anything else. Steadiness in the morning and in the blizzard and in the fever watch and in the long evenings over the ledger and in the ordinary days that were, when she looked back on them, not ordinary at all, but the whole of it, the whole beautiful, difficult, irreplaceable whole of it. She had come looking for a home. What she had found was better. She had found the people worth building one with. And the building, the daily, imperfect, unglamorous, necessary building, had been the home all along.